Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Plenary 16, Financing New Age Businesses. Can we have the video for the session, please? Would request Mr. Krish Gopalakrishnan to kindly take the discussions forward, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning to all of you. It's nice to see almost a full auditorium. We was just saying with so many parallel sessions. But I think the word new age and financing probably attracted all of you to come here because everybody is interested in both of these, right? And I also want to touch upon, the overall theme for this year's annual session, which is co-creating the future responsibly, the role of business. So here we are going to talk about role of new age businesses, but role of business generally, and the word with responsible, right? And the immediate past president R. Dinesh talked about trust. I think all of these are very, very important, and hopefully we will weave that into our discussions today. I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing the panelists. I asked each one of them to give me just one line so that I can briefly talk about the people. So to my extreme right, Vishal Bali spent 3 decades in healthcare, both on the operating and investing side, across the spectrum of early, mid and large pan-Asia strategic enterprises. And currently, he is the executive chairman, Asia Healthcare Holdings and senior advisor to TPG Growth. Immediate right is Lord Jitesh Gadia. Is a UK parliamentarian and helps to oversee the UK's central bank, a financier by background, is a former partner of global investment firm Blackstone. To my left is Kunal Bal, many of you probably are familiar with him. He's a technology entrepreneur and investor, co-founded the venture capital firm Titan Capital, is the founder of Snapdeal and Unicommerce, and chair of CIS National Startup Council, and serves on India's National Startup Advisory Council. And on my extreme left is Hasib Drabu, an economist who worked on public policy earlier and is now engaged with private sector on regulation, risk, and reputation management. A diverse, a very eminent panel. Now we are going to try and answer some questions in this panel in terms of why new age businesses matter, how much should you invest in this sector, what governance structures new age businesses should have, because very topical at this point. What role, of course, capital should play, domestic, international capital. We will briefly, today you can't avoid talking about AI, so I'll ask each one of them to give their perspective on AI, machine learning, LLMs, how this is important from an investment thesis perspective. And we will conclude by talking about 2-3 ideas from each one of them on how India can grow this sector faster, and which sectors, which industry sectors are important from their viewpoint. So I'm going to start from my extreme right, Vishal. From healthcare side, definitely the new technologies that are being introduced is expected to transform healthcare significantly, in the next 10 years, very, very important from a healthcare perspective. So how much of your investments are in the new age segment, and why you believe this is important?
Sure, Chris, and firstly, it's great to be on the panel, and thank you for the invite. So at AHH, we've been now funding early stage and mid stage companies almost for about a decade now, or less than a decade. We've invested close to about $320 odd million, particularly around the single specialty space, because a lot of our work on the multi-specialty side is a part of our TBG work. And we believe that one of the biggest inflection points that we are going to see in healthcare is basically the new age models, which are less capex intensive, will have a propensity for faster scale up, and therefore also high ROCEs, because traditionally this sector has taken a lot of capital, has evolved a lot over the years, but it has been targeted from the large format multi-specialty businesses, which 800, 900 beds, breaking even over 5, 6, 7 years. It's a long gestation play. Apart from that, we basically believe that the tech-enabled healthcare ecosystems, which sort of saw a peak immediately in the COVID era and the post-COVID era, in some form will come back in a more sustainable manner. So I'm extremely focused on building these platform-based healthcare entities, and AHH is actually a platform where we are running multiple single specialty opportunities.
Can you very briefly talk about one example of low capital intensity? One example.
Yeah, sure, Chris. So we have now built out across 7 years India's second largest mother and child hospital chain. This is a company called Motherhood, which now has, in fact, when we invested in the company, it had just about 3 hospitals in the city of Bangalore, very small, making losses. Today, that network is around 30 hospitals around the country. Our ROCE on that business is about 32%.
Okay. Thank you. Now, Jitesh, to you, a same question, but with a different perspective. You're coming from UK, and how different or similar are the approaches to new age businesses and investment in new age businesses, if you have visibility into India, um, between UK and India, and why investing in US business is important.
Sure. Well, good morning to everyone. Thank you to CII for hosting this. It's wonderful to be on as you say, such an eminent panel. I think to maybe start in reverse and talk about why a new age business is important, and maybe sort of take you back 15 years to some research which I was involved in commissioning on the board of something called the National Endowment for Science, Technology and the Arts, which is the innovation foundation for the UK. And what we found is that the conclusion was vital 6%. So what effectively it was saying is 6% of the fastest growing businesses were generating half of all new jobs. And actually, you might say, well, how profound is that? Well, actually, it is very profound, particularly from a policy perspective, because then you can laser focus in on exactly those businesses. We call them the gazelles, which you can accelerate or try to help accelerate, and therefore have the maximum impact. And I would say in terms of importance, it's not just the jobs that are created, which certainly in a country like India, in order to turn your demographics into a true dividend, you definitely need those jobs. But I think it's also to address some of the societal issues, other societal issues, in a more efficient and effective way. And I think healthcare is a very good example where we need to do more for less, or more for more, if I can put it that way too, because we keep expending more on those systems. In terms of ecosystem, the new age businesses, certainly in the UK, are attracting huge attention. We have a $1 trillion tech sector. There are, I think, if you look at investments versus our immediate European neighbors, I think we have, I think, something like 2 times Germany and 3 times France invested into new age businesses. And I think we're vying almost toe-to-toe with India in terms of unicorns, in terms of numbers, well over 100. So in terms of mind share, I think it is definitely right up there in terms of policy priorities.
A very quick question to you. You talked about jobs, and you talked about the $1 trillion invested. So acceleration of the growth of the economy. But we are seeing that this is also causing faster business cycles. How any very quick thoughts on how these should be addressed, because we are seeing businesses failing also faster, jobs being lost also faster. Any thoughts there?
Well, look, I think this is a part of the Schumpeterian, gales of destruction. For those who are sort of economists, this is what ultimately this is partly it's intrinsic to it. I think you gave a very insightful interview with your co-founder of Infosys to the Economic Times just a day or two ago. As I was coming in, I was reading it. It is that entrepreneurial force that, if you like, by its nature means that when you disrupt, there are sectors that therefore have to, will be superseded. But often I think the accelerator model, the incubator model, where you sort of cut to the chase a little bit more, and you have the ability to fail fast. In terms of those businesses that are affected, the jobs, I think the key is the redeployment of skills. I think that is the area, particularly I would say in Western economies, that we are still work in progress, because you can see people's ability to earn a livelihood almost sort of, and it will continue with AI, be transformed overnight, and being able to re-equip them, retool them to do the jobs of the future will be important.
We'll come back to that. Kunal, I probably think you are probably the youngest in this panel. You are also one of the founders of one of the first, this wave of, a unicorn from India. And now, of course, you are also funding with your own fund, etc., Titan Fund. So again, from your perspective, how important, and of course, in the last 10 years, all of you have created an amazing startup ecosystem, which has now become the third largest ecosystem in the world. So how, from your perspective, you've done a startup which has been successful, I think 2 startups which are successful, and now you're investing in this sector, and you are now the chairman of the National Startup Council also. So from your perspective, why this has really become prominent, and how should we take it forward?
Yeah, thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure being here and an honor being in the company of such illustrious panelists. Firstly, I think we have to thank entrepreneurs like yourself, Chris. I don't think I would be sitting here if it weren't for you. So I think we should give him a round of applause to begin with. So I think I was talking to a 11th grade, which is one of the reasons I was a couple of minutes late. I was talking to an 11th grader right before this. He was doing a series of podcasts about, people from different professions, etc. And one of them was about entrepreneurship with me. And he was telling me I'm so happy you're doing this. He was just fawning over the fact that I was giving time. I was like, all of us got to where we got to by standing on the shoulders of giants like others. And I think we got to where we got to by standing on shoulders of giants like you. So, and I think it is now time to pay it forward also. And I think God's been kind, and we can pay it forward even earlier in our careers than maybe others have been able to, partly because the fundamental infrastructure of the Indian internet economy has expanded so dramatically over the last 15 years, where I remember when I started in 2007, there were 5 or 7 million internet users in India. To present day, 17 years later, there are 1 billion internet users in India. So imagine the arc of the evolution of the country over the last 17, 18 years has been so dramatic. I was we are taking one of our companies public. So recently I was meeting some, foreign investors, public market investors, and they said they had that, usual skepticism that, we've heard this before, that it's India's time this time. And every time we hear that it's India's time, something happens that disappoints us, and it becomes this 1 step forward, 5 steps back, right? And we've all, as Indians, heard this before also. And they said that, but why is it different this time, Kunal? Why would it be different? And I just said there's only one reason why it'll be different this time, which is technology. At no point in the past has any nation, and particularly our nation, been as connected as it is right now. With 1 billion internet users, with close to 1 billion Aadhaar, now more than 1 billion Aadhaar validated IDs. UPI, which all of us use. I'm not carrying a wallet. I don't carry a wallet anymore. I go from Delhi to Bombay on a day trip without a wallet, just my phone. You have the entire India stack. You have the health stack. You have all these stacks that are getting created. These did not exist. These only started existing literally in the last 8 years, 9 years, 7 years, in that orbit. So obviously this time it will be different. And it is different because of technology. And from AD 1 to AD 1700, we were the top 2 GDP in the world. In many centuries, we were the number 1 GDP in the world. And it's only after 350 years, from 1700 to now, where we will be again a top 3 GDP country again, in the next 3 to 4 years, not in our children's or grandchildren's generation, but in our generation. So what a time to be alive in India right now. And I think the culmination of the fact that the heft in our economy is growing, the fact that we are, very young country, 28.5 years average age, the fact that we have supportive government policy, the fact that we have domestic capital activated thanks to the leadership of titans like Chris, and we are doing our small part in that. And finally, thanks to all this ubiquitous connectivity. So all these things put together is the reason why it's going to be different this time. And we all know in our bones that it's different this time.
You mentioned one of your companies is going IPO. So it prompts me to ask this question. Many of the IPOs have not been very successful. Any thoughts on that? Any very quick comments?
I could say that about the, industry at large, right? Like, I don't think that applies only to tech companies. Even it's just that the pro and the con of being a new age business is it gets disproportionate media coverage, and which means that the good gets highlighted. Like, we are all seeing Zomato's stock price go to new highs. And also when companies hit a stumbling block, that also gets highlighted and amplified equivalently. So, at least I tend to not read too much into it. I think we do what we do the best we can, and let the markets decide.
Asib, again, same question, but I'll add just one more so that the second round can get started. So investment in new age companies, why it's important? Do you want to also touch upon from your perspective, because you in your one-liner about yourself, you said engaged with private sector on regulation, risk, reputation management. So I want to tag on to that, and it's a follow on to the question to Kunal. Any thoughts on how these new age businesses must create trust, must create the runway for future businesses to tap investors, tap public markets, etc.?
Thank you. I have an old economy take on the new age businesses. And so, to my mind, a new age business is not about sectors. It's not about spaces. It's not about size. We seem to move between new age businesses and startups almost like, in the same way, which is not true. To my mind, new age business is not about a sector or a technology. It's about a mentality. It's about a mindset. It's about a value system. And that is what lies at the core of a new age business. Is the difference between me and Kunal. There's a natural difference in the way you perceive a thing. Your risk appetite is different. Your reputational concerns are different. Your governance requirements are different because you see things differently. And that's what creates a new age business. It's not that a steel industry or a steel plant is not a new age business. It will be a new age business when you're looking at your green steels or you're looking at decarbonization. What are the three trends driving today? You are talking about decarbonization big time, you're talking about decentralization, and you're talking about digitalization. Now, whenever you apply these three to any of the businesses, they become a new age business. So let's not also create this whole thing of new age versus old age. Stone age did not end because there were no stones. Stone age ended because it was taken over by something else. And the new age will consume and appropriate the space that the old economy operates. It has to have time. Now, where do I see the critical differences? Because I come from a public policy perspective. Old economy or old age businesses worked on catering to markets. I see a market, I cater to it, and that's what the entrepreneurial thing depends. New age businesses create markets. And I think that's a critical difference in terms of how you want to see it. Similarly, when you look at, you ask a question that investment in new age businesses, investment is investment, whether it's public investment or private investment. So it is critical to growth. Now, what you will do in investing in new age businesses is your matrix is very different. And the problem is that while the new age businesses are growing because of enterprise of youngsters, the ecosystem around is not growing. So you're the biggest issue of a digital asset not being recognized by the financial services sector, which is why you can't access public markets. You're still looking at private markets. I ran a bank for 6 years. A brand is not a collateral. It's an asset-based lending. It's a collateral-based lending. And here you have created a new age business, which is asset light, which axiomatically means that you're not going to get finance. So, but is the ecosystem evolving? Yes. Now you're getting more into partnerships, not a relationship like a bank would have with an old age business. So I think it's from that perspective one needs to look at it differently. It's not that these sectors are important, to be honest. So, and it's about when you also talk about, are you kind of hedging our businesses? Like I work for a group that is old economy, but is it transitioning to new economy? Yes. And that's where the rebalance your portfolios comes in. You would want to kind of see that 1/3 should be in that sense. But the real question that is being asked is, if you're looking at decarbonization, then are you saying that the capacities you have created over the last 100 years is just going to disappear? Of course not. So the big game in new age businesses, to my mind, is how do you transition the old age businesses into new age economy? That's the real question that one has to address. And you need to create a policy environment for that to be a new ecosystem. And that's what will be driven by.
So, so this round I'll start from you. You mentioned this, you're transitioning to new age business, right? So how do you, you can take example of steel, or you can take example of, fossil fuel. How do you transition to a newer business? Very briefly,
I think one of the things critical is how much do you want to spend on R&D? You have an existing capacity. Are you investing in R&D enough to create new processes to do, ranging from a very Indian jugaad to a very sophisticated model which is replicable and scalable? So if SR is trying today in Stanlow to make a first green refinery, then what is the underlying technology? Is it ingrown? Is it purely an issue of productivity? And how can you replicate it across various sectors? Because you're also changing the entire distribution network. What technology has done is to disrupt that network. So critically depends on, you want to do steel, how do I decarbonize that? By using of imports or fuels and whatever. So that's where the trend will lie.
Okay. Kunal, I'm going to ask you a question to comment on what Haseeb talked about, because and you see, one of the drivers that is different from the new age businesses, quote unquote, is the ability to scale, because they're primarily asset light and technology driven. It rides on the internet. It doesn't have any barriers for, in terms of physical movement of goods or national boundaries, etc., right? Your ability to scale is almost infinite in that sense. And with technology transitions happening every 10 years or so, we've seen the internet in the 90s, in the 2000s is the mobile phone. Now we are into the AI machine learning, the OpenAI, ChatGPT kind of thing. Do we leverage these? And of course, the traditional businesses also will leverage these things, but their ability to scale is limited because they have to move physical goods. Do you have any comment on that? And do we treat these differently?
Sure. So, I think there was a time when in the startup ecosystem there used to be a lot of this is not me, but I'm just broadly speaking. There used to be this feeling that almost a borderline disdain, right? Like for how old economy or traditional economy companies ran themselves, and somehow all the startup founders felt that they can do 100x better job. What I can tell you is, till the time the funding was flowing in, that perception continued to persist. the moment the money train stopped, everyone suddenly had 100 times more respect for what the traditional, the large enduring businesses that have been built in the traditional economy. And 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 now what we are seeing is, while there is always this perception that the digital economy or the startup economy is mainly made up of these infinitely scalable, zero debt, zero capex businesses, that is changing. Where founders are now saying is that, look, I don't have to do that. I just need to have a particular point of view that even if it is a traditional economy sector, can I do it better? Can I do an old thing in a new way? And a lot of the companies that we are now seeing get started in what we call in the broader B2B economy, which is whether it is in the solar space, whether it is in various types of manufacturing businesses that are started, that have been set up by startup founders. They're doing extremely well, but they have the same scalability issues of the traditional companies, which were built over generations, decades. But they are using technology to bring in more efficiency, to cut wastage, improve processes, etc., and probably accelerate sales. But I don't think that we are now in the phase where, and I agree with what Dr. Drabu had just said, that the lines have blurred. There was a time that there used to be, these are the startup guys, and then this is the real economy. The lines over the last 5 years, and I think increasingly so, and actually the lines are now blurring in geometric progression, where every passing day we are meeting companies. I met a company day before yesterday that's trying to change how the auto spare parts ecosystem works in India. There's nothing to do with internet, and yeah, it's one of the enablers, etc. But he just has an insight about why he can do what has been done for the last few decades a lot better, right? And obviously that generates, hopefully, profit pools, etc. And I feel that's a great thing for the country, because that creates this healthy competition between the incumbents and the folks willing to really push the boundaries and try doing the same things in a better way. I think it's better for the nation.
Okay, Jitesh, both Kunal and Asib, have a similar definition of new age businesses. So I will take it forward and come back to this governance issue. These new age businesses have typically young founders, and the company, when it starts, is typically small. Of course, it grows very rapidly when it scales. So what kind of governance mechanisms should they have? And should they have, ESG considerations from the beginning, or it comes at a later stage? What is your comment on that?
If we're honest, it's a very tricky area to navigate, because by definition, the frugality with which startups grow up and their husbanding of resources and the need to do things proportionately in the early stages means that they're doing things in a lighter touch way. And I think the important thing is to do it proportionately, but the ability to scale as the business is scaling, and not then treat it as a, if you like, nice to do thing, but it must be a must do thing as you go on. And unfortunately, I think you mentioned the IPO market in India. I think there have been a couple of examples where post-IPO things have emerged. And I'm afraid that does spoil it for others. It does spoil it for the next wave. And some of those, whether they're governance or compliance or whatever you want to call it, but those deficiencies have been very visibly brought to the fore. I would say it's incumbent on investors not to turn a blind eye when they're sitting on the board, because they're there. They're the ones who have hopefully a horizontal experience of how these things are done well. they also have skin in the game because hopefully they are people who are going to keep coming back to the markets for exits. And therefore it's in their own reputational interests to hopefully make sure that these things are, not, there's no shortcuts taken. In terms of specific sort of sustainability and other measures, those are things that I think are very sort of market-to-market driven. Certainly in India, you have particular sort of approaches to sustainability, for example, and CSR and other things, which I think in many ways are sort of sort of defining boundaries for other countries as well. So I think that's how I would describe it.
So Vishal, I won't repeat any comments from your side in terms of difference between new age or traditional businesses, or in terms of governance, in terms of ESG considerations?
Yeah, so Chris, at least for us, also it depends on the nature of capital, right? Because as you now know that there is a lot of impact money that is also being raised by different funds. And obviously the requirement for that capital in terms of governance are even more stricter. So from an ESG compliance perspective, I think it's now becoming almost imperative for most of our investments to be governed through the ESG route too. I think what is more important, irrespective of the size and scale of enterprises, I think the governance bit now has become extremely crucial and critical. Now, subcommittees, the boards, obviously, there is a lot of pressure on the boards too, because, in the new age economy and the new age companies, growth happens very dramatically. But also the governance has to grow along with that. You obviously can't put, a 100-pound governance engine on a business that is worth a few cents. But I think what is more important over here is how the overall governance ecosystem of the enterprise is also evolving as the enterprise evolves. And I think there are many lessons which have been learned over the last a decade now. And hopefully we will be in an environment where governance will precede over everything else.
Coming to the next round, and if you have questions, just hold on to them, because with the next round I'll come to you. Vishal, you manage both domestic and global funds. India has to attract global funds in order to grow the economy all the way from physical infrastructure to the startup ecosystem. Having said that, I feel that domestic participation has to increase, and domestic ownership, if wealth has to be created in India, right, domestic ownership has to be significant. Otherwise, all the success of the startup, the new age businesses will accrue somewhere else. Any thoughts on what should be the proportion as a country, and any thoughts on how do we encourage more domestic capital to come into the entrepreneurial ecosystem?
No, that's a very good question, Chris. And I think we've been, over the years, with all the global funds taking a big share of, of the India startup ecosystem, that has sort of led to, a massive amount of capital coming in. But I think over the last couple of years, and we are seeing this in the retail markets too, in the, what used to be largely FPI, you see a lot of momentum happening, particularly in the stock market too, with the Indian retail investors. That just goes to show that there is a certain amount of maturity that's going on in the capital markets, and of course of the domestic funds, domestic retail investors who are now beginning to see the new age economy businesses also very, very differently. I think it's important, one, as you rightly said, that we need to see funds maturing a lot more within the country. And you can see that now, funds which have started from India, you see a couple of them over 2-3 rounds have now become billion-dollar AUMs. And I think that's fantastic, because that is really what we want to see coming out of the country, where there is more capital, homegrown, which is pushing capital behind homegrown companies. And that is obviously over the next 10 years, that's going to catch a lot more momentum. I think what is also important is it's not just the early stage funds, but I'm finding this across different categories. You know, it's today when we compete for businesses, it's quite often that we go and see an Indian fund competing with us for the same businesses, willing to put $1 billion to work. Now that is something which was not there a few years back. So I think we are seeing a big maturity cycle happening in the capital fundraising environment, and I, for one, am very, very glad to see that many of the Indian funds are beginning to do much better.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that, Vishal. I've been advocating that there is a lot of wealth in the country, and if you're a family office or if you're running a fund, maybe 15% at least should be going to the startup ecosystem.
Yeah.
As a thumb rule. Jitesh, I don't know about the situation in UK, but what was happening was that when you look at these startups beyond Series C, we are seeing that 80-90% of the ownership is actually with overseas funds. This is where my concern comes, right? That when all the risks are gone, when the startup is now on the track to go IPO and things like that, the ownership is now foreign, right? That's why I said wealth will be created elsewhere. Any thoughts? And I don't know what the situation. I should have probably looked it up in UK. Is this a concern in UK? How did you address it?
I think that there is a broader concern about effectively de-equitization, and it's a peculiar feature of our pension fund market, where particularly defined benefit pensions, where over time, because the nature of them, they get de-risked and go into lower risk, more fixed income type assets, and therefore the ownership of even the stock market in the UK amongst pension funds has sort of effectively gone down to 4%. So you can imagine what has happened in terms of investment in other riskier assets, and they're sort of correlated. So I do think that ability in terms of asset allocation across the economy, and for your, if you like, for your domestic investor pool to be appropriately allocated to an appropriate balance of risk and return is important. And I think it's partly driven by actually having a sort of a healthy savings and investment market where you can gain access at all levels, right? So not just for institutional capital, but further down the stack. And that happens through obviously appropriate pooled investment vehicles that are appropriate, because look, I think, these are illiquid investments, so we've got to be careful that you're not stuffing retail investors with things that they're going to be stuck with and not being able to manage. So look, I think this is not just an India issue. I think it is a global issue.
Kunal, I know that as the chairman of the Startup Council, you have been also looking at this issue, we're talking to the government. Our own public funds, etc., also very reluctant to come into the startup ecosystem, and probably for valid reasons, but I think certain percentage can probably be allocated so that you benefit from this faster growth. All of you talked about this faster growth of new age companies. Your experience, any thoughts, anything we should be, new government is going to come, anything we should be talking to them about?
Yeah, I think we need all the money we can get our hands on. So whether it is domestic, international, as long as it's clean money, we are happy to take it, right? I think that should be the mindset we have. We should not get overly zealous about, it has to be only domestic money or only absolute blue chip pension fund money. I think if there is some family office sitting in Switzerland, loves the Indian startup ecosystem or is an Indophile, we should welcome them with open arms. So I feel we are in that build out phase of our nation right now where all and every possible capital, which is, clean capital, should be welcome. That said, if you look at the foundations of most of the startup ecosystems around the world, they were built off domestic capital. And if you look at, let's say, the European startup ecosystem compared to the Chinese or the American startup ecosystems, why the European startup ecosystem never became, while they have enough GDP there cumulatively to enable that, and they have created some great companies, but nothing compared to what we've seen in China, come out of China and the US. And one of the biggest, not the only drivers, but one of the biggest drivers is that there is no significant domestic venture capital ecosystem in Europe, or nothing compared to China and the US. And the fear always is that we should not go that way. We should definitely go the American or the Chinese way, right? And having this bedrock of domestic capital. And one of the things that this government has done, which is tremendously good, is the setting up the fund of funds. Where 8 years ago or 9 years ago, when this was being ruminated, there were a lot of people were rolling their eyeballs and saying, one more scheme that'll never see the light of day, and nobody's ever going to get money, or there's only one way to get the money if you eventually get it. And they've really proven everyone wrong. Where the SIDBI sponsored fund of funds has now invested in 140 domestic funds, right? And from what I gather, they started with 10,000 crores. They now have 15,000 crores because the value of the investments of the funds that they've invested in have grown that much in that period. I actually feel it is still a drop in the ocean. 10,000 crores which is 1.2 billion over a period of 10 years is just it's too small for a nation of our ambition, our size, and our future. And what we really need is maybe 5,000 or 10,000 crores a year that should be put in. So it really propels the startup economy into just orbits that we can never imagine sitting here today. But I feel that hopefully with a lot of the things that the government had even announced in the interim budget around, the essentially zero interest loans for it was 30 years or something for deep tech startups of 50,000 crores. So the government has clearly demonstrated its desire to create that bedrock of domestic capital for the new age businesses. And it's not only words, they've also shown actions. And hopefully when the new government comes in, and that's part of the advocacy that CII will also do, is that they need to loosen the purse strings a little bit more and provide the necessary fuel for our ecosystem.
But what about family offices and private? You talked about government.
Yeah, correct. So I think, look, they are in it to make money, right? I think we should be very clear that it's maybe people like you and me who have this emotional relationship and this romantic relationship with entrepreneurship. But a lot of family offices are just asset allocators, right? They just want to allocate to, here's how much into publics, here's how much into privates, etc. And they just need to see liquidity. The biggest challenges for family offices is that they put in money because they get mesmerized by the founder's pitch, and then they never see the money back, right? Not because they've run away with the money, but liquidity cycles are so long, it takes 10 years, right? Or 15 years sometimes, or never also, and they should be ready for that. Should be ready to go, let some of your investments in this sector go to zero for you to start investing. But it's a feeling that not everyone is okay with, of losing principal. It's a different kind of feeling. But I do feel that is changing, Chris. A lot of the family offices started investing in domestic venture capital funds. They've gotten a taste. They've seen success also. Now they're telling fund managers, we want to have co-invest rights, so they're co-investing. So they're getting a taste by hitching a ride to the guys who are a little more knowledgeable. I feel if I were to draw a trend line, the trend line is definitely in the direction of more participation going forward.
Yeah, and if there are people from family offices sitting here in this room, please invest a part of your wealth into the startup sector. You're, of course, building wealth for your family, but you're also participating in nation building. So please do that. Azib, domestic capital has come into public markets. In fact, in the last few times, the foreign portfolio investors took money out of India, which they are doing even now, worried about the election, etc. The domestic investors are coming in very strongly, and our stock market, the market is going up almost every other day actually because of the domestic capital. So any thoughts on how can we attract private capital? Government is now coming forward. How can we attract private capital to come into the startup or entrepreneurial ecosystem?
To be honest, that's a very old economy approach. Markets will
You
drive
are
it
always
today.
pushing me
I'm
back.
actually quite intrigued by what is happening here. The biggest lesson is that, from what Kunal has just said, is that the startup economy has matured. The whole point of a new age business was distance from government, unregulated sectors. And the old economy was driven by public investment. Today, what am I hearing from the national chairperson of the startup? That I want government intervention, right? Not done. That's not, money, but it's not about, so, and what do I hear an entrepreneur like you saying? Allocate 15%. Why? The market will find, the water will find its level. If you give me my MOIC, I will invest. It's a family office or not family. I'm an asset allocator, yes. I look for my returns. You do your bit, and I will do my bit. Don't put any condition, because you're going back.
So you say prove it and then
no,
money
it's
will
also,
come.
I'll tell you the mindset. This country has moved from a command and control economy and the rise of the regulatory state. You're going back to the command and control, saying, okay, allocate now. Like you did for bank credit. 42% has to go to agriculture. Why? Similarly, now you're saying 15% should go here. My point is that the whole thing is now coming of age, and we are still in the old economic mindset. Now, governance, you raise a very important issue. The key to this story of governance is that this new age businesses have to be self-regulated. They can't be regulated by the government for a particular reason. And the reason being, when you do regulation, you're looking at public interface. The new age economy also builds in a private personal involvement, privacy issues. Now, unless you regulate from that perspective, and it has to be a social regulation. It could be a collective of, your startup regulation or whatever. So the governance accordingly will have to be done in that form. Today, the government regulations are bureaucratic layers. You tick the boxes. What is ESG about? Every single company is today doing a chapter on ESG, and that's about it. There's no, and you are now, even at this stage, mixing CSR and ESG. So the whole process system is not coming of age. That's where one needs to look at it from a public policy perspective. Now, we talked about 2-3 times, we mentioned about 8 years, the thing about build-up of the phase of nationhood. This nation is way beyond that space of 8 years, 10 years. The Aadhaar started somewhere in 2004 with Nandan coming in and kind of doing, which led to the build-up of the entire leveraging of that structure. So let's also not negate the kind of, the dwarf of the new age economy sits on the shoulders of a giant called the old economy, and it looks further than the giant. That's the story. Let's not kind of go back to a situation where you will regulate what is an unregulated sector. Thank you.
Okay, no, I did not meant in any way that it's only the new age businesses are going to drive Indian economy. It's everybody together. There is a role for large businesses. See, typically, industry sector grows around 6 to 8%, maybe if in a good year 10%. Now the booster, as many of the panelists have said, comes from this new age businesses, which because they're starting from zero, the growth is infinite. So they actually stimulate higher growth, exponential growth, and put on top of the growth the traditional businesses or established businesses or large businesses, boosts up the growth rate of the economy. And if you want to go to double-digit growth for the Indian economy, I firmly believe that we need to have a robust ecosystem for entrepreneurship. We have to look at ease of doing business, ease of starting business, ease of sustaining that business, and ease of keeping those businesses in India. Okay? So that's where I'm coming from. we'll open it up for 1 or 2 questions. I want to see, how these questions are, please ask relevant questions. Please suggest who you want the question to be directed to, and please recognize yourself, brief. Yeah, please.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Gunjan Gatyal, and I'm from IBM. So my question is to Kunal. So Kunal, when you started up with your organization, Snapdeal, so what were your main challenges and goals at that time? And now, new technologies like AI coming up, what do you think it's gonna shape your organization in order to grow?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Honestly, as a startup founder, when you start, you just want to stay alive for one more day. I don't think you have big game plans or ways you're going to take over the world just yet. But in the early days, it is just literally about one step at a time, adding one team member more that you can afford now, and getting one customer more who will pay the bills. And so it's a lot of that type of gritty work in the beginning, right? But over time, obviously, things change. And that is really the period that you want to stay alive till you hit what we call in our startup parlance, product market fit, where whatever product or service you have, you want to get to the point where enough people start loving it that you have a reason to exist as a company. And if you are not able to hit it, you have to try something else, right? So the early days was primarily that. And obviously, the ecosystem was very different. I remember when I started in 2007, there was nothing known as a startup. It was either you ran a business, which was usually inherited, like your father or mother or someone started in the family and you also joined it, or you did a job. Typically, people like me were seen as people who couldn't get a job and didn't have a family business, and hence they were somewhere lost in the middle, which is now what is called the startup ecosystem, right? That no man's land that I belong to at one point in time is now, fondly called the startup ecosystem. With respect to your second part, which is AI, like people keep asking this question, like, what will change? What will change? What will change with AI? And what I say is like, what will not change? Everything will change, right? It's just the rate of change may be different, but everything will change, and everything has been changing. But what we are seeing is, thanks to this, extremely strong computing power, like this growth in geometric progression of computing power, we are seeing the rate of change accelerate now, right? We are seeing, all these OpenAI, ChatGPT, and other algorithms. That said, I do feel that not all the changes that will happen as a result will be good. Some will be detrimental also. Some will be detrimental for our country, and we must reflect on those. Because as a country, we still need to create lots of employment and not start coming up with ways to reduce jobs. It may require reskilling, upskilling, etc. But these are important questions we must reflect on. But everything will change, that's for sure.
Can I ask a question, sir?
Thank you.
Who has got a microphone?
I have got
Okay, go ahead.
Thanks.
Again, introduce yourself, brief, and then who should the question be answered?
Myself, Sanjay Goenka. I'm from representing Bihar Industry Association. We ran an incubation center. It started in 2015, and in fact, made government of Bihar think that they should start up the ecosystem.
Your question.
The question is to Mr. Vishal Bali. So we started a startup ecosystem, had a good number of funding. Through government we made it, but we tried 4 years back to fund a startup. Say, ecosystem we tried to create in Bihar. So 10, 12 of us industries, we made a pool and gave it to first of the entrepreneur. But we had a very bad experience. So now we again want to restart it. So what are the takeaways we should look before investing in any startup? That's what I want.
Yeah, so I think every experience leaves a lesson, right? So I'm sure that you've realized where you failed in that investment, and as an investor, and the business that you invested behind. I think there is a lot of learning that one goes through. Early stage investing is obviously risky. There is because there is no proof point behind a business, and that's why it is seed, and that's why there is Series A and Series B. And as Chris was saying, that by the time the business actually expands and grows, there are a whole bunch of other investors who begin to come in because they like to see, more finite business getting created. So I think at least in our mind, whatever has worked very well is one, the credibility of the founders and where they come from, what they have done in the past, and also their ability to create credible businesses. Businesses can go down, that's not a problem, but are they going down the credible way, or are they going down the way because they are just not being governed the right way? So every investor learns this lesson over a period of time, but there is no harm. You fail once and you will probably succeed 10 times more in the future investments.
Because of paucity of time, all the panelists are going to be available after the session, so please catch them with your questions. I'm going to ask each of my panelists to, it's a rapid fire now. Just again, quick reaction, one sentence. Which sector you're most excited about? So
obviously health, Chris. There is a bias to that. Health tech, and more importantly, I think the other one which I frankly believe very strongly is going to change is the entire focus on environment and clean tech. I think that's really going to be the one that we should all watch out for.
Jitesh?
So look, actually, funny enough, I do think health, but more life sciences as well. Interestingly, we hosted an AI safety summit in the UK in Bletchley Park last year, and our Prime Minister Rishi Sunak was on stage with Elon Musk, and they had the same Q&A, same question. The answer, interestingly, probably from both, was personalized tutoring in education, which I think actually is something which is very exciting and could really harness the best of human potential.
And interestingly, you may have heard about OpenAI's 4.0, where one of the demos they're showing is personalized tutoring. The AI is able to do a fantastic job of personalized tutoring. So, I don't know where we are going. Kunal, which sector?
Yeah, I think I agree on health and education. I do feel that, and this you may relate to, Chris, is one of the spaces I'm very excited about is software, where traditionally India was known as where people send here are the specs, write the code and send it to me. I think we're going to do it different now, which is we're going to create products. We're going to create products that are infinitely scalable, that are not sold as services. And I feel that we're going to see a dawn of a new wave of Indian software, which is Indian products, software products, not just Indian code, which is running the world today, but going forward, Indian software products will be running the world tomorrow.
Hasib,
in the overall setup, the thing which I would be very excited about is the regtechs. So you've had this whole growth of fintech so far, and given that what's emerging from this sector, the need really is of a regulatory compliance across geographies, because it's not about confined to a sovereign territory or a geography. You're doing multiple geographies at the same time, meeting multiple regulators. So one line which I think would be perhaps be the most exciting thing for the next 5-10 years would be the evolution, growth, investment of regtechs.
So you have a snapshot of what funding looks like today, not just in India, but with Jitesh's participation, a outsider in view, and Vishal, of course, also managing international fund. Why the sector is important? We also heard briefly which part of the industry sector is important. We didn't talk much about AI in this panel. You heard very brief comments about AI. This is extremely important for India and Indian government, Indian industry, Indian family offices as citizens. I believe that we all need to participate in this. We need to enable this. We need to embrace it, and we need to take advantage of it. The next 25 years are going to be even more exciting. The pace of change of technology is actually far superior to the pace or the ability for human beings to change. We take previously it was thought that one generation is required. That's about 20 years is required for human beings to change, because new people will come and embrace new things, or people will learn new things. The space at which the language models are now changing is 6 months, and the capabilities are going up exponentially. And if you have not seen the demo of 4.0, please take a look at it. It's showing emotions. It's having, it's actually joking with the person. It is, examples like tutoring, etc., where a father and child, trying to learn algebra or something like that, and the way the machine is able to teach is far better than what a ordinary teacher would be able to do in terms of explaining, etc. So we are actually moving to a very exciting period. We need to embrace this change, and we need to enable, and we need to do whatever we can to actually contribute. See, we represent 20% of the world's population, India. And I firmly believe that 20% of the innovations, 20% of the economic growth, 20% of everything, and 20% of the consumers are all in India. I think we have to play our role in the growth of not just India but the world. We also have to play the role of creating products for the world, which is also very important. Thank you all very much. Hope you liked our panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, panelists, for an engaging discussion. Would request Mr. Gopalakrishnan to present the token of appreciation to the panelists, please. Lord Jitesh Gadia. Mr. Vishal Bali. Mr. Kunal Behel. Dr. Hasib A. Drabu. Thank you, panelists. Can we have another round of applause, please, for the panelists? Yeah. Now would request Mr. Kunal Behel to kindly present it to Mr. Chris Gopalakrishnan. Yeah. With this, we come to the end of this session. Would request everyone to kindly join us for the session at Darbar Jahangir and Sharjah. Thank you.